Hello everyone, this is John from Vulgar Getting Studios, and welcome to episode 10 of our Introduction to Web Development and PHP MVC Framework tutorial series. So what we're going to do in today's video is we're actually going to try to get our routes working on screen. So the idea is to be able to go to a route, and even like the home, just the main page of the application, should be a route that points to a controller, which then calls a view, or does whatever a controller does, but in this case it's going to call a view. So what we're going to do is we're going to open up our home controller, and we're going to try to render out our home view. So we're going to say app service view render, and we want to render our templates front end pages home, like that. And we don't need to pass anything in. All we want to do is just basically call that view. And as we can see right now, because we're not routed, nothing actually happens. So we can refresh this as many times as we want to, and nothing's actually happening because there's nothing to tell our application to point to this controller. And so that's what our routes are supposed to do. So we'll go ahead and open up our route service. So we'll go into our model services and find our route service, and we'll start working on this. Now we're actually going to have to work on a couple of other services in order to get this to work. That will be happening. I'll go ahead and open up our input class because we're definitely going to need the input right out the gate. But first of all, let's go ahead and make a protected static URL. So we want to be able to pass the URL as an array, and we'll also need a protected static routes to store all of the routes, and that is also going to be an array, and we'll make a protected static params in order to pass in parameters into a route as well. And so now that we have that, let's just go ahead. Let's go ahead and do our input class. Which the input class, if you've ever worked with any kind of PHP before, a couple of my services are actually based off of the tutorials that Alex Garrett put together from PHP Academy, or it's actually called Code Course now. If you have ever done anything with PHP, you've probably run across some of Code Course's material, PHP Academy's material. So that's what, like, a couple of my services are actually the objects or whatever. They're actually based off of some of the tutorials that he did before. So I just wanted to put that disclaimer out there. So that's basically what our input class is going to look like, with a few modifications. We'll go ahead and make this a static function, a public static function, and call this exists. And we'll want to pass in the type, and we want to check to see, or we'll default that to post. So we're going to assume that if we don't say that if we're not looking for get, then we are going to check for post. So we'll go ahead and switch, or we'll say if our type is actually set. So we'll say if is set type. Then we'll go ahead and switch on type, and we'll say case post. Then we'll want to return if it's not empty. So we're going to say if not empty, $_post, the super global post array. Then we'll return true, otherwise false, and then break out of that. We'll also say case get, so if the type is get, then we'll return not empty, and we'll just change that to get true, false, otherwise, and we'll just default to return false and break, like so. Okay, so let's see. Honestly, since type is always going to be set. We don't even really need to check if the type is set because it's always going to be set no matter what. So we'll just take that out and we'll just put the switch statement right there. And we'll go ahead and make another public static function and call this get, so we can return our get data. And that will be just return if is set $_get name. Then we'll want to return get name. Otherwise, we'll just return an empty string like that. And we'll do the same thing for post. So I'm just going to copy this down. And we'll change this to post. And change this to $_post. $_post. Like that. And the last thing that we need to do is to be able to actually like escape data. So we'll say public static function escape. And we'll want to put in the string that we want to escape. And we'll return HTML entities, our string, define the int quotes option for single and double quotes, and that's for UTF-8 only. And that is our input class completed. So now we can go back into our route class and use our input class to split up the URL. Now, we're going to, first of all, just make this a get URL. And in our services, I'm actually going to use a convention of camel casing. But then again, I used snake casing before. So just to keep everything universal, I'm going to use snake casing here. So I'm going to say get URL like that. And we'll use a ternary operator again. We'll say input get URL. And we'll want to set that self URL is equal to input get URL. Otherwise, self URL is equal to /. And this just means that if there is get input, then our route is going to be whatever the get input is. Otherwise, it's just going to be / to return the root of the domain. So the current domain, the just /, like this guy right here. And I mean, like, even if you don't put that on there, it's still going to be there. So that is essentially what we're saying right there. And so now we'll do our public static function initialize. And we don't need to accept any parameters, but we do need to call self get URL. And we'll set URL, just a variable of URL, to be self URL 0. So that way we can get the first element out of that. And so what we need to do is we need to actually grab our container, our routes container. So we'll say routes container is equal to file, or we'll just say JSON decode file get contents. And then we'll go up a directory, because remember we're executing this from the index.php page in public. We'll go up directory, go into app containers routes.json. And we'll set routes is equal to an array, and for I is equal to 0, I is less than count routes container routes I ++. And we'll want to set the next routes to be JSON decode JSON decode file get contents app or /app routes, the actual file path of the route, and that routes or routes container routes I and then just concatenate the .json onto that. And that should be it right there. So now we actually have the actual routes. We can set self routes or the actual route files to be routes. And so we'll need to loop those routes in order to execute anything on them. So we'll say for I is equal to 0, I is less than the count of routes, I plus plus. Then we want to say route is equal to, and that is going to be cast as an object the current routes. So we'll say routes I. And so now we want to actually extract any parameters if there are any. And I'm just kind of mimicking the way that Laravel defines parameters within a route. So if we saw something like ID, that would be a parameter that we could actually pass into this route and execute some kind of function on that. So that's how we're going to actually handle our parameters. So in order to be able to do that, we need to extract anything that would be within those curly braces from our routes or from our URL. So we'll say self params is equal to preg match all. We're going to use the preg match all pattern or function. And for the pattern, we'll need to use some regex. And this is just going to get everything. We get a grouping of everything that is within the curly braces. So that would be this, essentially. And what we want to do that on is going to be the route path, and we'll just name the matches. So that is going to be equal to that. So we want to actually set the array values to be matches 1. Otherwise, it's just going to be an empty object. So we either want to have parameters or not. And give myself a little room here. So now that we have that, we can say if not empty, self params, then we can do something with those parameters. So we want to go ahead and get an array of all of the URLs, or we'll make an array of what paths we have in the URL. So we'll say URL array explode, and we'll explode by the /, and we'll do input get URL. And we'll set the self params that's got to be params. Okay, that was a little bit ridiculous, but all right. So we'll set the URL or the actual parameters array to be the reverse of itself. So we'll again array reverse self params. And like I said, this is just a good way to work with a string dynamically because we have no idea how long it's going to be. So in order to make sure that we execute the logic on every single piece of it, we just reverse it. So we'll say that we or we'll say the URL array is equal to array reverse as well. Array reverse the URL array, and then we'll loop it. So we'll say for I is equal to 0, I is less than the count of self params, I plus plus, and in here we want to check if is set the URL array I, then we'll say self params I is equal to URL array I. And outside of our loop, we could say self params is just going to be the reverse of itself again. What in the world has happened here? The syntax highlighter on Windows 10 is just going haywire. I don't understand that. That's insane. I'll leave it alone though. It'll probably correct itself at some point. So array reverse self params. And no, I mean, like, I'm not gonna do that. That's a JavaScript syntax highlighting. So we'll go back into route, and hopefully it'll be fixed. And it's not. That's interesting. Very interesting. Ah, okay. All right. My fault there. I forgot a colon. So that was not the syntax highlighter. Oops. All right. So now we'll say URL array is array reverse of URL array as well. And now we'll set a new variable for the full path, and that will be an array. And now we'll construct our full path array with array unique array merge URL array and self params. And that way we get a new array of 2 arrays, but without any leftover. And so that's essentially what we're doing here. So now all we need to do is just actually make a string out of that. So we'll say full path is equal to implode by the / because that's how we want to put it together, and we want to put the full path together. So then we'll say our route path is equal to full path, like so. And so now we actually have a list of parameters that we can work with. And so now we want to see, let's see. Need to make sure that I don't go out all the way. All right, there we go. And so now we just want to actually start calling our controllers. So we'll say if preg match, just preg match 1 this time, and we'll use, let me use double quotes, We're not going to use forward slashes in this regex because it can cause problems with the URL, considering that it actually uses forward slashes. So we're going to use hashtags instead, or the pound sign, and it'll work in just the same way. So what we want to do is we want to evaluate the entire URL, so we'll start string, end string, and then pass in the URL, and we want to evaluate that against the route path. And then we'll set the controller to be equal to sexy. Remember, we need to escape controllers, and then just depend on the route controller, like that. So then we can say if count self params, then we can actually execute the controller with, or we can execute methods on that controller with parameters or not with parameters, like that. And actually, we don't need to do an else because we'll do additional checks there, and just doing it outside of this block it will suffice for saying that we don't have any parameters. So we'll say for I is equal to 0, I is less than the count of route filters now, and then we'll increase our counter. Now that we're getting into filters, the way that filters are going to work is we're going to have a class within the filters folder here that it will call, just like every other namespace, it will call that filter, but it needs to return a true or false value in order to execute that route. Now, what we'll wind up doing is in our routes file, if we have any filters, then we would pass them in as filters, and we'll just have an array of filters. So within this array, we could have our CSRF or admin filters, and those, like every filter within that array, will need to return true in order to execute whatever controller is in that route, and that's how we're going to make our middleware strategy. So what we probably need to do at this point is stop working on the routes and actually make our filter command so we can generate a filter in order to test this. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to open up our commands, and we'll go into our filters command, and this should be fairly quick because all we got to do is just generate. We got to write out a template and generate that template, and then also be able to delete those templates if that's the case. So what we'll do is we'll say if our type has been passed in, and we're going to make it empty, then we'll check to see if the file exists. First of all, app models filters, and then the name of the filter plus the file extension. So if that's the case, then we'll shell write that filter already exists, and \n red, else we want to create a template, and the template is going to be app service view make templates code filter empty, and it's going to have an array of data, which is just going to contain the name of the filter, and we'll put it in like that, and then we'll just actually file put contents app models filters, the name of the file .php, and the template, and then we'll just shell write created filter successfully. like so. And the delete is also equally as straightforward, so we'll just say if not file exists, then we'll just check for app models filters and name.php, then shell write no filter by that name could be found. And we'll pass that as a red string, else we'll actually delete it, so we'll just unlink app models filters name.php and shell write deleted filter successfully. And so we can open up our command line and just php lace filter make csrf, and we have parsing error, so unexpected name on line 63. And well, it's a good thing there's a syntax error there, because like it stopped the script, because we were going to try to do that without even having a template for it. So we need to actually make a template. So again, that's my fault. I'm getting a little ahead of myself. So we'll make a new file, and we'll just call this filter empty.blade.php, and our empty filter is going to use the shorthand echo from PHP to echo out some PHP tags, because it's got to be a PHP file. And we'll put our little line at the end of there, and we'll enter our comments section, which I'll just go ahead and add the comment: filter must have a main method and return a bool value. And we'll namespace that under sexy models filters, and we'll use sexy app, and that will be a class with the name, and we'll give it a public function main, and we'll just make it return true by default. And so now we should be able to PHP lace filter make, we'll just make a test filter first. So we test filter, let's see, we have models filters test, and everything appears to be a-okay. So let's go ahead and PHP lace filter delete test, and that is gone. So yeah, let's just go ahead and make that again. So we'll use a test filter. Okay, so within our route class, now that we have the ability to make filters, within our route class, we're going to check to see if the count of parameters is there. And if the params are there, let's see. We'll want to do another check first. We'll say if is set your route filters. So if there is a key called filters within our route, then we'll loop. And we will say route filters I is equal to sexy models filters, and then the name of the filter, and then route filters I is equal to a new route. Route filters I, like so. And now we need to create a check variable, which is just going to be an array, and this is going to hold a list of all of the filters that return true. So we'll say for I is equal to 0, I is less than count route filters, then I plus plus, and in reality we could probably just take this. Well, no, we want to only instantiate it one time. We don't want to, so yes, we do actually want to make another loop. Because if we put this within here, let's see, or we could just say do this, put check right there, pull this out, and then we only have to loop one time. So there's a tiny little micro optimization there, but we can check if route filters I, and then call the main method on that filter. It must return a true or false value. Then we can array push to check our route filters I. So that will now be in the array, and now what we can do is check the count. So we'll say if count check is equal to the count of route filters, then we can actually execute that route and call the controller. So we'll say controller is equal to a new controller, and let's see, then we'll just return call user func array, and we'll call the controller and the route method, and we'll just pass in the self params as its parameters. Otherwise, we're just going to return, and then we'll use our redirect class to send it to an error page, or basically an access denied page. So that means that we need to actually create our redirect service. So we'll go into our services and open up our redirect file. And within our redirect, it's a pretty short method, or a pretty short class. It consists of one method. So we'll just say public static function to location as the parameter, make that equal to null, and we'll check to see if the location has been passed in, and we'll check to see if our location is numeric. So if it is numeric, then we'll send it to an actual server page. So we'll switch on location and set up cases for each of the possibilities, and that would be 401, and we'll just do 401 and 404 for now. We won't get too heavy into that. So we'll use the header function, and we'll throw a HTTP 1.1 401 unauthorized error, and we'll use the view error function to send it to a 401 error. So that means that we need to make a 401. So we'll say 401.blade.php. And in here, I'm just going to do an h1 access. Well, do an italic access denied, and I'll give it a style with the color of AA0000, just red. And for now, I'll just make another one and make this 404.blade.php. And this one is going to be not found. 404, bro. Alright, so there are our error pages we can actually use our view class for. And so we'll just exit after that and abort the app. So then we'll header HTTP 1.0 404 not found error for this one, and we'll view error 404 here and exit. And if the location is not numeric, then we'll just use the location functionality to pass in the location and then exit. And so that's how our redirect class is going to work. And so if we call that without or with params, then it's going to send it to a 401. And now we just need to call it without the filters. So we'll just essentially do the exact same thing as this right here. So we'll just call that. So yes, it's the exact same thing. And we'll also want to do that if there are no parameters. So let's check to see if we're outside of the count of parameters. So if we have a URL without parameters, then we also want to be able to check for filters as well. So that means that we're just going to essentially do the same thing that we did right here. So we'll just check to see if there are any filters, and if there are, then we'll execute the route only if the filters pass, and so on and so forth. So let's see. If count params, if preg match. Yes. So now all we need to do is just actually call the method if there are no parameters. And the way we'll do that is we'll just come outside of the check to see if there are any parameters, and then we'll just say our controller is equal to a new controller, and then return our controller with the route method. So route method, and just fire it off like that. And so if all went well, that should actually work. But we also want to have the ability to call it for if the page is not found. So to do that, we'll say for each. We'll use a for each loop this time. We'll say for each self routes as route, and then we'll nest another for each. So, or for each routes as routes, for each routes as route. Then we'll set our route is equal to an object just for tidiness, and we'll check to see if not preg match. And remember, we have to use our hashtags for our pattern, and we'll start in the string evaluated against the URL. Then we want to do that on our route path. Then we'll just return redirect to 404. And so that should throw a 404 error. So let's go ahead and see what this looks like. We'll come back in here, and it doesn't look like it's doing much of anything. So it's not actually calling a route, it doesn't look like. And that is because we actually need to call it within our app container. So we have our service now. What we actually need to do is go into our app class, which is our base container. Let me just go ahead and just close down everything. And I'll open up app and come into here. And so with this, what we'll need to do is call self service, and we'll call the route initialize function right there. And so that should actually call it. And so it does look like it's calling a view, because I'm seeing a title here. But let's see what happens if I go to option. So we do get a 404. And if I go to my view, not views, but if I go to my routes and I attach a filter, so we'll do filters and pass in test, then this should return still. But if I go to my filters and return false, then that gives me access denied, so our filters are working. And so that means that we can go ahead and PHP lace filter delete test. So our test filter is not needed any longer. And I can get that out of our home route there. And we don't need this. We don't need this. The only problem that I'm seeing so far is that our home view is not being called properly. So maybe it is. No, it's actually being called properly. I just don't have anything in it. So if I go into templates and then go into our front end pages home, and I just call this home, and I'm just going to make a big H1 italic, call it sexy MVC, and just give it that style of color. Then we should see, there we go. So this is actually echoing out the wrong place. So what I want to do is pull this back and then put a space right there. So that way the title should appear in the right place, and there's our sexy MVC. So the only thing that we haven't tested on our routes so far is our parameters. So let's go ahead and add some parameters into here. So let's go into our home controller. Well, that should still work. Let's give it a parameter of name. And within here, we'll just pass in our name variable, call it name. And here we just want to echo out name. So that means within our route, we need to pass in name. And so here I can just type in my name, and that is going to tell me that it's not found. So yep, I don't assume that that would actually work with the home. Okay, so let's see. Right, okay. So let's go back in here. Let's forget about that. And we'll take out the parameter. We'll actually create a new route to test that out. So we'll say PHP place route make test. And the path is going to be test. And the controller is going to be home controller. And the method is going to be test. So now I can make a public function test and pass in the name. And I'll just do the same thing down here. And within the view, I'll just say if is set name, then I want to echo out the name. So let's see. Alright, so we're still good there. But let's go into our routes, go into test, and let's put the name in here. And we'll go test John. It's not found. Okay. So because I overlooked things, I didn't realize that I was putting the path or the parameters in the name instead of the path. It's got to go into the path. The name is just a name that is associated with the route. So the name itself has to go within here, and that is how I get it to echo here. So obviously it's just going to call test here, but it's going to call home here, and the test route, you can put whatever name in here you want. So Jimmy would even suffice, and it'll echo out Jimmy. And so that's how our routing system works. The only thing that we need to do now is just be able to extract the proper route or the route path based off of the name. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and grab, we're going to go back over to our root class, and we're going to go down to the bottom here, and we're going to create a new method. And we'll call it public static function URL, and we want to accept the name of the route that we want to use. So we will just basically do the same thing that we did for the 404. We'll do a for each within a for each, and we'll say for each self routes as routes, and then we'll do another for each, and we'll say for each routes as root, and we'll cast that as an object, which is going to be equal to object route, and then we'll say if Craig match, And then our pattern again, which is going to be start of the string, end of the string, and then the name that we pass in. And if that matches to the route name, then we'll just return that route path. And so that pretty much completes our route class for now. So I appreciate you watching. This has been quite a long video, but we did get a lot done in this, and we're actually getting to more to the fun parts now. We can start working with the application and making it pretty and actually getting things done. So if you followed along this far, again, thank you very much, and I'll see you in the next video.